Hey, what up? Welcome back to another quick Flutter tutorial. Today I'm actually going to go through the Dart programming language. So Flutter is the framework and Dart is the language underlying it. If you're really new to coding and you're having issues with Flutter, most likely it's because you don't have an understanding of the basic programming concepts. Similar to how if you don't know any math, then trying to learn physics is going to be damn near impossible. So my goal with this tutorial is to give beginners enough of a basic understanding of programming so that you can then go off and build things on your own, which is where I think the true understanding happens. Now, obviously programming is a huge world, so I'm not going to go through every single detail that there is. And if you're a beginner, I don't even think you do need to go through every single detail. And to kind of put things into perspective, I always love the analogy of thinking about how you would learn any language. Say, for example, when you learn English. No one knows every single word in the dictionary, yet that doesn't stop us from saying what we need to say or writing what we need to write. In fact, you can write some pretty sophisticated stuff using just some basic words. Can you imagine if we had to learn every single word in the dictionary before you even write a sentence? It's just not the way we learn things. So that's the first point that I always love to drill in a beginner's brain, which is it's okay to not know everything. But what you do need to know are some very basic concepts in programming, which can take you very far. And hopefully after this video, you'll start building things yourself, and eventually you'll face a bit of a roadblock, or you think to yourself, man, there must be a better way to do this. Then that's when you go to Google and then you look this stuff up and start adding new things to your toolkit. And I promise you, if you do it this way, you'll never forget it because you'll know exactly what problem it solves for you. By the way, just while we're on this topic, I genuinely and wholeheartedly believe that Googling is a skill. I think particularly with programming and software engineering, being able to self-teach is a requirement in my opinion. Now, with that being said, let's have a look at some code, and I want to teach you 5 basic ideas. By the way, Google has provided this very nice Dart pad. So just go to Google and go to this website, dartpad.dev. And this is really useful because we're just doing some Dart programming. We're not doing anything related to Flutter necessarily. So you don't have to install or download anything on your machine. This is just on the web. So go to Dartpad and you should see a main function here. And we can click on this run button and we can output some stuff on this console. So the very first thing, just to show you, is a print statement. Let's just say hello. And then we can just click run and hopefully it says hello here. Sweet. So when you're doing programming, it's always going to start off on this main function. And so the 5 concepts I want to get across to you today are variables, operators, control flow, functions, and classes and objects. So starting with some variables, I want to show you 4 different types of variables. So the first one is just a string, and I'm going to say string first name is Mitch. And so if I put this in my console, we can store this in our variable called first name. And so if I just print this out, then it should just say Mitch. Now, a couple of things that you can do with strings is you can actually say, if you put a dot, you can see all of these different options. And so you could say first name dot length. If I just print this out, it'll tell me how many characters are in this string. So the word Mitch has 5 characters. And there's a lot of other things in here that you can go through. So is it empty? Is it not empty? So if I just choose one of these ones, let's say, is it empty? Well, clearly I have something in here, so it's going to return false. And if you actually get rid of this dot and have these square brackets, you can actually index a letter. So what I mean is, if I say 0, it'll get me the very first character in the string. And so in coding, you will notice that it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It always starts from 0. So if I said like 4, it should return this letter H. Okay, so using this, we can access each character in the string. Sweet. And then we can do some other cool things like say string last name is Coco. And when we print it, let's just see what happens if I say first name plus last name. It'll just stick it together, and this is called concatenation. We can just kind of put strings together. So that's pretty handy. Now the next variable I want to show you is an integer. So an integer is basically a whole number, so no decimal place. So for example, say integer age, I am 26. As opposed to the third variable I want to show you is a double, which is essentially decimal place numbers. So say like double height is 182.56 centimeters or something. Okay, so if you want a decimal number, then use a double. If it's just a whole number, then use some integers. Cool, and the very last variable I want to show you today is a boolean, which essentially just means a true or false value. So I'm going to say boolean is beginner, and I'm going to say true. So in a boolean, you can only store two values, a true or false. Whereas if you think about like a string, integer, and double, it will have essentially infinite number of values it could hold. So using these 4 variable types, that should be enough as a beginner to get you very far. And these variable types are not specific to Dart. You'll find it in other programming languages as well. Sweet, and so now we know about some variables, let's have a look at some operators. And I should also mention, when you have these 2 slashes, it's just to put a comment. So the code's not going to execute it, it's just for humans to read. Another way to comment things, if you want to comment a lot of stuff, you can do this. And so anything in this block will be comments. So let's say the different type of operators. So the first 4 basic ones that we should all know is plus, minus, times, which is going to be an asterisk, and a slash for divide. So just to show you, in the print statement, let's say something like 6 plus 2. If you add it and we run this, then it spits out 8. If I do 6 minus 2, it spits out 4. And this is how you do multiplication and also division. Cool, so these are the 4 basic math operations, and there's a lot of good handy ones. For example, this percent sign is essentially to tell us about the remainder. So if I say like 6% 2, hopefully you guys can do some math, there's no remainder, right? So it'll just say 0 as a remainder, and this one is particularly useful. If I said like 6 divide 4, what's the remainder? It's just 2. And even with just these 5, again, it should take you very far. Sweet, and then on top of that, we also need to know equals equals, which just checks the equality. Now, one thing to know about equals equals is when we say 1 equal sign, you're assigning a variable. Like first name is equal to Mitch. Like we're telling first name that it should be Mitch. Whereas this double equal sign, it's just checking if it's equals or not. So what I mean is like 6 equals 6. It's checking, is 6 equal to 6? And it will say true. Okay, so I should maybe just put that here. So equals is assignment, meaning we're going to tell the variable what it should be. And equals is checking the equality. There's also the exclamation mark, which basically stands for not. So like if I said exclamation mark equals, it's checking, check that it's not equal, right? So if I said like 6 exclamation equals to 10, does 6 not equal to 10? Yeah, so it should say true. And just while we're looking at this exclamation mark, if I take this boolean, it says this boolean is beginner is true, right? So if I said print is beginner, then it should say just true. But then you can also put the exclamation mark here, which reverses it, and it will say false. Okay, so that's what this exclamation mark is doing. And then these ones, I'm not going to spend too much time on the next few, but we got smaller than, greater than, smaller than equal to, greater than equal to. which hopefully you guys know what that means from some basic math. So I'm not going to go through these 4 because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And I'm just going to show you just a few more. The next one is plus plus. And this one is just incrementing. Meaning, if I said my age is 26, right? And so this main function is just going to run all of this stuff. So I'm just going to put a bit of code here and say age plus plus. So then if I just print out my age now, you can see it's 27. So it just added 1 to 26. So same thing with this, it's going downwards. So if I say minus minus, from 26, we should go to 25. And let's do one last idea, which is the plus equals. And so the way to think about this one is double plus sign is just incrementing by 1, right? But what if I want to increment by, say, 2? Then you can say age equals to age plus 2, which is 28. So it's just taking what my old age value was, I'm adding it to 2, and so that's my new age. And this type of operation is very common in coding. And so a shorthand way of writing this is plus equals. And this should give you the same 28. So this one is age equals to age plus 2. And so that's with the all other operations. Like you could say this, this, and this as well. Cool, so I think we're making some good progress. Let me know, by the way, if you have any problems with anything. I'm sure other people can help you out, but I'm also going to hang out in the comment sections to answer some questions. So let me know if you have any problems with any other stuff. Now, just before we finish the operators, I'm going to go through 2 more things, which is the and sign. What this one does is it basically checks both things on either side of this symbol to see if they're both true. Okay, so for example, is beginner and age is greater than 18. So is beginner is true and age is greater than 18. Well, I'm 26, so that is also true. And so if both of these are true, that's what this is checking for. It'll say true. If I switch this to like the other way, is my age less than 18? Even though this is true, because this one is false, it's going to print out false. So this one is useful for checking if everything is true. Now, if all you care about is one of them at least being true, then that's when you use this symbol. And this will just check at least is one of them true. In this case, is beginner is true and this is false, but because one of them is true, it's just going to spit out true. Cool, so that's basically all of the operators that I wanted to go through. Let's turn our attention to the control flow. So this is a very big important idea. So now we have some variables. We can kind of mix up these variables with different operators, which brings us to the control flow. Now this is a very essential part of programming, and I'm sure you've seen, if I just get rid of this print statement, the most fundamental and most commonly used control flow, I'm sure you have maybe seen this before, is an if statement. So we could say something like, if age is less than 50, then just print something out. So in this bracket here, you don't have to just print. You could put any piece of logic inside here, just depending on what your app is going to do. But for us, let's just say something simple and say, okay, if you're less than 50, then let's say, you are so young. Learn code now. Right? So this is just a very basic if statement. And naturally, following on from an if statement, you can also put an else. Right? So this is the condition we're checking for. So if age is less than 50, let's execute this bit of code. And if age is not less than 50, then we can do something here. So we can say, you are a bit old, but you can still succeed, like the KFC man. KFC man, Colonel Sanders, I think he was like 60 or 70 when he successfully made KFC into what it is. So yeah, so this is how you use an if-else statement. Now you can also actually put in a else if. So we can just start off with an if statement, just checking a particular condition. And if this is not true, then you can check another if statement. And so you can actually put in as many of these as you need. And then the last else will just do the default case if none of those conditions are true. Now, if you find yourself using a lot of if statements, it might be better to use a switch statement. And so the way we use a switch statement is, I would say, very similar to what we did with an if-else statement, but it's able to check, say for example, the first name. We can have different cases. So I'm going to say case Mitch. So if first name is Mitch, then let's say this guy is lame. And we can have more of these. And we could say Steve. Okay, then we can run this. And so with the first name, which is a variable, you can just check, all right, is it this? Is it this? Or is it this? So this is useful when you need to have a lot of different cases. Then you don't really want to use if-else statements too much. So that's what a switch statement does. Let's actually do what we did before. I'm going to say we looked at if statements. We looked at switch statements. Cool, and the next one I want to show you is a while loop. So what a while loop does is you say, it just checks the condition inside, and as long as that holds true, it'll keep executing the code inside. So for example, let's say in the age, I'm going to say, so while age is less than 60, let's increment the age. And also print out what the age is. So the thing about a while loop, let's just see what comes out here. So you can see at the beginning, I'm an age of 50 years old, and it's just checking. Age is less than 60. Yep, I'm less than 60 years old. If that's the case, let's increment an age. And so that's why we're printing out 51. And then it will just keep looping until this condition is no longer true. So one thing about while loops is you need a way to break out of it, right? Like otherwise it'll be an infinite loop. For example, if I don't increment this, right, and I'm 50 years old, if I don't change the value of age, then it's just going to do this forever. And so I wonder what's going to happen. Yep, and I think that screwed up my... yeah, and so it will never break out of the loop. So it'll screw up your code. And because we're not changing the value of age, we're never going to break out of this loop. And so you can see you're going to run into some issues. The page is unresponsive. Oh my God. Okay, good. Looks like it still saved all of my stuff here. So that's why with a while loop, it's very important that you have something that will break out of the loop. And so this is why, if you're a beginner, I think it's better, instead of using a while loop, to use a for loop, which is the last control flow I want to teach you about. Because a for loop already takes into consideration those issues. So what I mean is you get for, and in a for loop, you need to specify three things. You need to specify a starting point. So let's say I equals to 0. And as long as I is less than 10, just keep going up. Okay, so if I just print what I is, and I run this, so it just starts from I equals to 0. And as long as this is true, just keep adding 1, right? And so it'll go up to 9. And so starting at I equals to 0, as long as you're less than 10, just keep adding 1, keep incrementing it. And so that's why I recommend to use for loops for now, if you're a beginner, rather than while loops, because when you use while loops, it implies that you already need to specify these things somewhere in the code, right? So that's why I think for loops are pretty recommended. But yeah, these 4 control flows are, again, going to take you very far. Cool. Now, in my main function it's getting quite large, so I'm actually going to just get rid of this and let's just paste it below here. Cool, and the next thing I want to talk about is functions. So this is very, very important. And also I'm just going to put these variables outside of the main function. So functions is a very important concept, and what a function is this is a function. This is called the main function. So I'm going to create another function. Let's say void add 1 year. And what the word void means is it's just not going to return anything. And later I'll show you a function that actually does return something. So if I say I'm going to call this function, then let's add 1 to our age. And let's also print this age. Right, so I'm going to have to call this method, let's say in the main method. So your code will automatically look for this one first, and then we're just going to call this one. Let's run. Cool, and there it is. So using these functions, you can separate out different logics. So this is a very basic example of a function. I spoke earlier about what void means. It just means you're not returning anything. But let's say I do want to return something. Let's say I want to have another function saying integer add 2 numbers. And inside, let's accept 2 parameters. When I called this function, I didn't really need to give it anything. Like, it just got my age and it just did whatever. But you can also have other functions where you can accept parameters. So for example, let's say integer a and integer b. Let's say that there's 2 numbers. Then integer sum equals to a plus b. And because this is an integer function, it's going to have to return the sum. Okay, so it's going to return an integer. So let's try this one. Let's get rid of this function. I'm going to say let's print add 2 numbers. And it requires 2 parameters. So let's give it 2 numbers. I'm going to say add 3 and 5. If I print this, or if I run it, it says 8. So it's going to run the main function, and we're going to print whatever this gives us. And because this gives us an integer, we can print out that integer, okay, by giving it 2 parameters. And so you can imagine all sorts of functions that you can create. Like, I'm going to give it 2 numbers and give me the multiple of them, and so on. So functions are going to be a very important part of your programming journey. And just to remind you, void means we're not returning anything. It's just going to execute something inside. And in front, if you actually have a type, it's going to need to return that type. So on a very basic level, that's how you use functions. Okay, so we went through some variables, we looked at operators, and then we looked at control flow, and now we looked at functions. So I'm just going to put this here. Cool, and the last thing is classes and objects. If you can understand classes and objects, then that's basically what people go to uni for, to learn in their first programming class, like the fundamentals of programming. And so this is a very important idea. So let me show you how to use this. So if you look at this, we created a bunch of variables for basically me as a person. So my first name is Mitch, my last name is Coco, age, height, and beginner. And so this seems like it could be the model of a student, right? Like if you have a particular student, tell me about his first name, last name, age, height, and are they a beginner? And so we can create a class of, let's call it student. And then we can say string first name, string last name, integer age. And so this class of being a student, we can then build something what's called a constructor. And then we can require the first name. We can require the last name, and we can require the age. So what this is saying is, in my main function, you can now just create students, right? So for example, let's say student Mitch Coco is equal to student, and inside here it requires us to fill out these three things. So that's what this bit of code is doing. It's saying when you want to create a new student, which is called an object, then make sure to give it these three information. Okay, so I could say first name is Mitch, and then last name is Coco, and then age is 26. Right, so why is this so useful? Well, if I have a class called student, I can now create different students. So I could say, let's create another student and say Steve Jobs. Right, got another student. I can say Steve Jobs. I don't know how old he is, rest in peace. 50, let's say 60. And so that's what it means to say object. And you might have heard object-oriented programming. That's what we're doing here. We have a certain class, which is like a template for what a student is. And an object is this, like we can actually create a student. And so if I kind of go back to my print statement, we can say, what can you print out for me Mitch Coco's age? Okay, and if I run this, it'll say 26. It's like, okay, well, what about Steve Jobs' age? 60. So if you can understand classes and objects, then that can take you very far. And of course, it's not just limited to these three variables. You can build out what you want out of a student, right? For example, like string course, like what course are they studying, and so on. And later, when your code gets quite large and verbose, that's when you put these sort of classes in different files so you can encapsulate the code. And we're not laying everything out in just like one page as we did here. So just to sum up, we looked at some variables and we looked at 4 basic types of variables, which are strings, integers, double, and boolean, which you're going to most likely use a lot. But there are other variables as well, like enum and so on. So along your programming journey, you'll find the use for different variable types. And then we looked at the operators. So we can now get the variables and mix them up and manipulate them together. So we looked at a lot of these math operations. And then we looked at the control flow, which is also very important, right? We looked at if statements, if else statements. If you have a lot of if statements, then you might want to use a switch statement. And then these loops, which are very, very helpful. And then we looked at functions, which again, this main function is a function. But then you can create other functions as well, like adding 2 numbers together, for example. And then finally, a bit of a more advanced concept was classes and objects, which we looked at just then. So these are the basic fundamental concepts in programming. And like I said, this is not necessarily specific to Dart. It's kind of common across all other languages as well. So you should be able to transfer this knowledge from language to language, but the syntax might be slightly different. And also, if you want, you can look up on Google the Dart cheat sheet and you'll find a lot of different resources online. So like, for example, you can look at these different cheat sheets and, summarize the stuff. So you don't necessarily have to memorize everything. But what I mentioned again at the start of the video, you don't necessarily need to memorize all of this stuff. You can just refer back to it when you need, okay? Because there's a lot of information here. And so what's important is for you to understand some of these basic operations. And then if you run into a problem, there might be a better operation out there that you didn't even know existed. So the internet's a great place, and do a lot of Googling as well if you need. But the most important thing is for you to actually sit down and code yourself, because you can watch me do this all day. Like, it's kind of like running. Like, you can watch someone, like a pro athlete, run, but at some point you're gonna need to step out and do the running, right? So that's pretty much what I had planned for this video. I hope if you're a beginner that this was helpful, and I want you to play around with it. And if you have any problems, then comment below, because I'm gonna hang out and I'm sure I'll help, but other people will probably chime in and help as well. So other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.